Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this series called Wildly Loved, where we are diving into really complex trauma brain related issues, basically how our brain might still be stuck in the past, in our childhood, I should say, and how that plays out in our lives today, and where we want to make shifts and changes and work to heal our hearts and stories and lives. And so right now we're talking this week specifically about something that is very close to my heart that I understand very well. It's just my story, but I've also become sort of a specialist in working with people who were raised by what often appears to be very borderline or narcissistic type parents who remained untreated in the childhood and often remain untreated in adulthood. That is changing in terms of treatment with borderline, for example, and becoming more talked about, and there's increasing treatments, even though I know it's difficult. So if you're a younger person watching this, please keep in mind, though, that historically for people like me, growing up a borderline parent, for the most of them never had any clue that they had this disorder. It's just how they were, right? They were intense and loving and chaotic and stressful and ragey and whatever. That's just how they were. But they could also be, like I said, loving and engaging at times, or it could feel like we're connected. And that is what makes this work so difficult. So if you feel like you may have been raised by parents like that who struggled and suffered, and as a result you struggle and struggled and suffered, please check out my courses down below. They are really truly meant for people like you who need some sort of healing and who have, who are struggling oftentimes still with the relationships in your life and with your own self-love and self-care and your own inner parenting and healing the broken parts of you. So we're talking specifically, though, this week about how the trauma of these kind of parents, and it truly can be very, very complex trauma and PTSD types of trauma depending upon what happens to you. There's a wide spectrum of this range of experience. And it's also true that it sometimes happens that borderline individuals will then choose narcissistic individuals and have children together. And so you might find that you have one parent who has layers of both or one of each. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences as you were interacting with them in this video. All right, so just kind of refreshing back to the last few videos is that children raised by parents like this often are created and expected to caretake the parents and themselves, and at the service of really sacrificing themselves, because we have to always keep that attachment bond connected to survive. And so if it's between me and you and I'm a child, I'm going to focus on you because I can't survive without you. And so we basically become overly empathic. We become self-sacrificing. We tend to be conflict avoiders, especially because in a lot of homes where there's untreated BPD and NPD, there's probably going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of emotional and relational issues a lot of the time. And we also become very perfectionistic. That's that inner critic, right? That inner self trying to get in front of everything in life so that we can get love. We can not feel bad. We can hold the best places for ourselves to survive based on the environments we're in. And so we learn that it's our job to do whatever it takes to make our borderline or narcissistic parent feel okay. If that means absorbing their negative emotions, if that means sacrificing ourselves, if that means, not focusing on our own bodily needs, that's what we will do. And if we have a more, let's say, narcissistic parent, we've learned to make the dance of life always about them. That if we want to get our needs met, we have to really be paying attention to what they want, they value, and things like that. And then if you had parents, as I said, who basically had both BPD and NPD, you're really struggling because you're doing this dance for different reasons and having sort of different outcomes that need to be happening for you to survive. And how do you do all of this so magically well? What is it, right? Hypervigilance and hyperintuition. You have learned from the time you were born, that little nervous system right here, your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is always reacting and responding and reading the environment inside and out for safety, and reading the parents and their attachment style and their nervous system. And so you become a master at tone of voice. That kind of size may be the precursor to a blow up. You learn to read, like I said, tone of voice, eye changes, facial expressions. You become hyper intuitive and hyper vigilant. And that kind of goes with what we talk about, the empathic type person, an empath, right? Where you are sensitive, you're reading things, you're reading the environment and the clues, and then it affects your body and how you regulate. But in the moment, you're highly cultivating and developing this skill to be hyper vigilant. And you learn and understand that hyper chaotic, extremely emotional environments were places where you needed to be hyper vigilant in your family system. And if you could somehow calm the parent down before it got bad, or soothe them afterwards, or separate the parents, or get into the fight, you were rewarded. First of all, it calmed everyone's systems down, and you did that, right? Or you had something to do with it. And you felt like it was your job and your power. And so all of this starts to connect. See what I'm saying? Like, that caretaker role is not just, I take care of people. It is like deeply wired in our bodies. It's sort of like, this is what I do. And frankly, I can do it pretty well. And by the way, I'll probably grow up and maybe choose a job where I do the same thing, where those skills get rewarded. And that can be a really great thing when you find a good match and you love what you do. But you have to be really careful, because it may be also that you chose a profession, that this isn't true for me, but that you chose a profession that you're doing what you used to do, but you don't enjoy it, right? So for me, I feel one of the blessings sometimes when I sit and I'll read comments, or I'll be at the beach and after a walk, and I just, I'm still doing my own work, and I'll be feeling, some kind of way or about something, and then I'll think about, well, not like, I'm glad I suffered so I can help people. I mean, yes and no. I wish I didn't have to suffer to help people, but there is something about it that it's like, okay, well, if I'm gonna, which is really a vulnerable thing to do, to begin to unpack what happened to me as a clinician and as a human, more here than in therapy, but it means that there is something about that honors and I hope helps people feel seen. That I'm not just, picking up a textbook and just saying, well, this is what it says about BPD, and that's why I've struggled to walk the line between talking about borderline as a child and talking about it as a psychologist, and not wanting to stigmatize people, but also really wanting to hold that I know, not just because of my story, but because of the hundreds of people I've worked with who have had some version of the same story, and how painful and really how much we don't talk about it, how difficult it is. So what's happening is that we are often in these families, we are very sort of enmeshed in the system, right? It feels like we're not separate beings. But this book talks about that a lot of the caretakers, those of us who come from these childhoods, outside of when we're in it with the parents, which we might still be in adulthood, we are often high achievers, we're good decision makers, we're highly independent. That's the avoidant part, I think, sometimes too. But it's not like the word, which I don't like the word codependency. I think it's great for substance abuse. I think it pathologizes our need to be dependent in family systems. But my point is that I think it's kind of true that in our systems we learn to be a certain way, but that doesn't mean that we don't know how to operate outside of that we're so dependent upon others outside of the family system. Many people will have these childhoods and move across the country, leave the country in general, or take jobs and do things and find ways to separate, even if it's just a physical barrier sometimes initially, right? So basically what we've developed is this intense emotional responsiveness, so much stronger than the average, it's relative, but healthier family system. And that these core things we do about putting our needs aside, avoiding conflict, they can make us really prone to being manipulated, to being fearful, to not speaking up for ourselves, to be really easily guilt-tripped, because we so don't want to be those other parents. I've shared in many videos that one of my biggest challenges as a mom of 4 has actually been to set and hold boundaries, because I'm not a yeller. I don't like to yell. And because I've been, kind of overwhelmed at times, not really being good at clearly at times communicating boundaries and then holding them accountable. And then, being so tired that I'll just do it myself. And I think this is true for a lot of us. And so for me, because in my home, there weren't good boundaries, but there was a lot of yelling around chores or what you're supposed to do. I didn't want to do that at all. I didn't want to raise my voice. And that happened too in relationship. And so, but what that meant was that I often didn't set and hold good boundaries and self-advocate. And then what did I do? I would hold resentment. I would be so angry inside, but not want to blow. I mean, yeah, occasionally I'm sure I have, right? But for the most part, trying so hard to not be this that I often sacrificed what I needed because I just didn't have good examples of what any kind of balance looked like. What does it look like to have that kind of thing? So I've had to figure it out. And then when your mom's a therapist or psychologist, you know, my kids are all like, they have all the therapy words. I could be like overly, you know, emotive and overly like, let's work through it. And they're just like, oh my God, just tell us what you want us to do, right? So it just depends on you and how it plays out for you too. But I do think that we can really pay the price. And so that's my next thing to you is okay, so you either, maybe you do have similar qualities as your parent, maybe you don't, but where does this childhood, where are you paying the price? Where do you feel angry? Where do you feel resentful? Where do you feel overly responsible, right? Trying to look at how all of that has shown up in your life. And then we're going to talk tomorrow about these concepts around fear, obligation, and guilt, and how those can show up. And those are also from this book. So I hope that sort of helped you dive a little bit deeper today. And I thank you so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Please stay safe and well, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell if you want to get notified of when I post new content. I am posting Monday through Friday, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Stay safe. Bye, guys.